The hall fell into a silence so sharp it seemed to echo. It wasn't the casual hush of people waiting. It was heavier than that, the silence of 1,000 eyes searching, waiting for someone brave enough to rise. At the front of the auditorium, the SEAL captain's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Any combat pilots here?" The words cut like a blade. No one moved. A few men shifted in their seats, smirking at the very idea. Then came the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Heads turned instantly. From the third row, a woman rose. Quiet, composed, unassuming. She didn't look like the hardened combat pilot anyone expected. A low chuckle carried from the back. "Her? You've got to be kidding." The captain's gaze fixed on her. Whispers spread. Laughter trickled. Doubt pressed against her like a storm. But she didn't flinch. She stood steady, jaw firm, hands calm at her back. No one there knew it yet, but she carried a truth that would change the room. A story written in call signs, scars, and firelit skies. Before we begin, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Her name was Captain Emily Carter. At 29 years old, she carried herself with the calm of someone who had already seen storms pass and battles rage. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud, and she never tried to command attention the way others did. But there was something in her steady eyes, a quiet gravity that made people pause once they actually looked at her. Yet most never did. To most of the men in that hall, Emily was invisible until she stood up. And when she did, she was judged instantly. Too young. Too slender. Too ordinary. She looked more like a flight school instructor than a seasoned combat pilot. Her uniform fit neatly, her boots polished, her hair tucked under regulation standards. She looked precise, but not hardened, not dangerous. Not the kind of person who had danced with fire in the skies of Afghanistan. They didn't know her story. Emily had grown up in El Paso, Texas, on the edge of the desert. Her father had been a Vietnam veteran, a door gunner on Hueys, who carried his own quiet strength. He didn't tell war stories at the dinner table, but his dog tags hung on the wall above her bed. As a little girl, Emily would fall asleep staring at them, wondering what it had been like for him to ride into battle with nothing but thin metal walls between him and the enemy. She never told anyone this, but her dream of becoming a pilot wasn't born from thrill or adventure. It was born from watching her father sit quietly on the porch at night, lost in thought, sometimes running his thumb across those tags. She saw the cost of service, and she wanted to carry the weight with him. But from the beginning, Emily was underestimated. In high school, when she announced she wanted to go into aviation, the laughter came easy. "Morgan, you're barely 5'6". You're not exactly Top Gun material." Others dismissed it with a shrug. Girls don't fly combat missions. Even some teachers tried to steer her towards safer, more appropriate paths. She never argued. She just worked harder. At the Air Force Academy, she didn't stand out in the way people expected. She wasn't the top of her class, wasn't the loudest in flight briefings. Instead, she spent long hours in the simulators when no one else was watching. She studied the manuals until her eyes blurred, memorizing every system, every emergency procedure. She didn't win people over with charisma, she won them with consistency. And still, the whispers followed her. "She's book smart, but she'll never handle pressure. She's too calm, she won't have the aggression for combat. She looks like she should be teaching algebra, not dropping into a hot zone." Every doubt became another stone in her rucksack, carried silently, fueling her in ways no one saw. Her first deployment came faster than she imagined. Afghanistan. Dust storms, jagged mountains, valleys where the enemy waited with RPGs. She was assigned to a UH-60 Black Hawk squadron. Not fighters, not bombers, but the lifeline of troops on the ground. Flee, medevac. Extraction. Missions where hesitation meant lives lost. At first, even her own crew questioned her. The crew chief muttered one day, not realizing she heard, "We're really trusting her to get us out alive?" She said nothing. But 2 weeks later, she flew them through a mortar barrage, kept her bird steady while medics loaded wounded, and lifted off with a calm voice that never wavered in the radio chatter. The same crew chief who doubted her walked off that helicopter and said nothing at all. Just a nod. And from him, that nod meant everything. Still, outside her squadron, she remained largely unseen. At gatherings like this symposium, where soldiers and veterans traded stories, the loudest voices were always the men. Pilots who bragged about missions. SEALs who boasted about raids. Emily would sit quietly, hands folded, listening. She never corrected anyone. She never sought the spotlight, and because of that, people assumed she had no story to tell. It was easier for them to believe she was just another name on the roster, a pilot who logged her hours and followed orders. But the truth was different. Her call sign, though few in that room knew it, carried weight in certain circles. Valkyrie. A name whispered after a mission that nearly went wrong in the Korengal Valley, where she had flown her helicopter into a kill zone to pull out trapped Rangers. She had taken fire, lost hydraulics, and still landed her bird with precision on a rocky outcropping under fire. The men she saved never forgot her name. And yet, outside those circles, she remained just Captain Carter. That's why when she stood in that hall, rising to the captain's question, the disbelief was so loud. To the audience, she was the last person they expected to see claim the word combat. But those who really knew Emily Carter knew better. They knew she had carried soldiers whose blood soaked her flight suit, had flown through tracer fire with engines screaming, had whispered promises to the wounded that she would not let them die before she got them home. Still, she never told those stories herself. That was Emily's way. She let others speak, while she stayed in the shadows. She believed true strength wasn't measured by how loudly you declared it, but how steadily you lived it. And that's why this moment, this rising in the quiet, was so powerful. Not because she wanted recognition, not because she wanted to prove the room wrong, but because, deep down, she carried a duty that had never left her. She had sworn to be there when called upon, and when the SEAL captain's voice thundered through the hall, "Any combat pilots here?" Her oath answered before she did. That's who Captain Emily Carter was. The quiet storm that no one saw coming. The SEAL captain's question still hung in the air. "Any combat pilots here?" And there she was, Captain Emily Carter, standing silently among the rows of uniforms, her chin level, her hands clasped neatly behind her back. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the murmurs began. "You've got to be kidding me. Her? A combat pilot? Maybe she logged simulator hours." The whispers rippled through the room like a current. Some men smirked, some outright chuckled, and others shook their heads. One Marine lieutenant in the second row leaned toward his buddy. "Bet she's flown more coffee runs than combat missions." Laughter erupted quietly around them. The captain didn't respond. Her jaw remained set. Her hazel green eyes fixed forward, unwavering. It only seemed to provoke them more. "Maybe she meant drone pilot," another voice teased from the back. "Yeah, safest way to fight a war from behind a screen. Hope she brought her Xbox controller." A roar of chuckles followed. The sound echoed off the auditorium walls. Still, Emily didn't flinch. She stood in the same quiet posture, calm, almost statuesque. The SEAL captain let the moment hang, his sharp gaze moving from her to the laughing clusters. He didn't speak. He was testing the room. And her. "Tell me," a burly sergeant called out, his arms crossed, "what'd you fly? Cessnas? Crop dusters? Or were you the tour guide over the Grand Canyon?" The jab stung the air, and again the room erupted in laughter. "What would you have done if you were her? Would you have shouted back? Walked out? Shrunk under the weight of it?" Emily did none of those. She simply breathed, slow and measured, as if she had all the time in the world. The silence in her body language clashed with the noise of the room. But the crowd wasn't finished. "Come on," one man said, his voice carrying across rows. "Combat pilots aren't 5'6". They're 6'2", square-jawed, and built for the G-forces." "No offense, ma'am, but you look like you'd struggle to reach the pedals." The laughter this time was louder, sharper, a pack mentality building in the hall. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, a shift began. Not everyone was laughing. Some, seated farther back, tilted their heads. They caught the subtle steadiness in her posture. They noticed she didn't crack, didn't fumble, didn't even blink too fast. Still, the noise continued. "Bet she flew cargo planes," another shouted. "Dropping snacks instead of bombs. Or maybe she was the in-flight entertainment," came another cruel remark. The insults layered on top of each other, piling high. Each new voice emboldened the next. And yet, she stayed. Her father's Vietnam dog tags brushed faintly against her chest harness as she shifted just enough to draw breath. Her wrist, the one with the faded rotor wings tattoo, caught a sliver of light. But no one noticed. Not yet. What would you have done if you were in her boots, surrounded by sneers and chuckles? Would you have broken the silence? Proved yourself with words? Or would you have stood exactly as she did, unyielding? The SEAL captain finally spoke again, his tone level but his eyes curious. "Captain, is it?" Emily gave a single nod. "Yes, sir." The voice was calm, firm, controlled. It carried through the hall not because it was loud, but because it was steady. Some in the room stopped mid-laugh, but the silence didn't last. "Sir," someone called, "she probably just flew training flights stateside, nothing more dangerous than turbulence over Kansas." Another voice followed quickly. "Bet her logbook's cleaner than my kid's homework." A few men snickered, but now the laughter was less confident, thinner. The captain studied her. "And where'd you serve, Captain Carter?" Her answer was crisp. "Afghanistan, sir." The words landed like a stone in still water. For a moment, the hall hesitated. Afghanistan. The word had weight. It carried images of mountains, valleys, firefights, helicopters lifting off under fire. But disbelief pushed back almost immediately. "Afghanistan?" someone scoffed. "Probably flew the generals around?" "Yeah, VIP transport, nothing but air conditioning and leather seats." Another burst of chuckles, though smaller this time. But there were cracks now. A few of the older veterans in the back exchanged glances. Men who had served there themselves. Men who knew what Afghanistan meant. They didn't laugh. Their eyes lingered on her, sharper now, curious. The SEAL captain leaned forward. "What bird did you fly?" Emily's reply was quiet, but every syllable was clear. "60 Black Hawk, sir." This time, the silence stretched longer. A Black Hawk. Every soldier in that room knew what it meant to ride in one. To hear the blades thunder over a valley. To cling to its steel frame, while rounds cracked through the air. The hall shifted again, though the resistance was still strong. "Black Hawk?" a young corporal muttered, shaking his head. "Yeah, right. Maybe she was co-pilot. Maybe she fetched maps." Another chimed in. "Probably never saw combat, just flew supply crates." But the laughter was thinner now. Not everyone joined in. Because Blackhawks weren't jokes. Blackhawks meant fire, chaos, rescue, survival. What do you think? If someone said they flew a Black Hawk in Afghanistan, would you laugh, or would you lean forward, waiting to hear the rest? Some in that hall leaned forward. Others clung to their mockery like armor. The SEAL captain didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just studied her, the faintest flicker of recognition tugging at his expression. "Afghanistan." "Black Hawk. And you say you saw combat?" "Yes, sir." The words were quiet, but they landed like thunder. The hall no longer laughed. They murmured instead. Confused. Disbelieving. Some scoffed, but softer now. Others simply stared, unease written across their faces. Because in her calm, in her silence, something was shifting. The hall had changed. The laughter that had once rolled freely now lingered only in small pockets, forced and uneven. Most eyes were fixed on her, on the woman standing tall and silent in the third row. Captain Emily Carter. A few minutes earlier she had been invisible. Now she was the storm in the center of the room, And still, she hadn't said much of anything. Only her name, her rank. That she had flown Black Hawks in Afghanistan. It wasn't enough to silence everyone. Doubt clung like smoke. "She's bluffing," one voice muttered. Anyone can say they flew combat. Talk's cheap. But others didn't join this time. They were watching her too closely. Because, every so often, little details betrayed something deeper. When she shifted her stance, the sleeve of her uniform slid just enough to reveal ink on her wrist, a faded rotor wing tattoo. Not decorative, not flashy. The kind of tattoo pilots earned and carried like a badge of identity. One man noticed. A Navy petty officer near the aisle leaned forward, squinting. His smile faded a little. "That's not fresh ink," he whispered to his buddy. "That's worn. Earned." The buddy shrugged it off, but his eyes darted back to her wrist again, as if unsure. Then, as Emily folded her hands behind her back again, the chain around her neck glinted faintly in the auditorium light. A sliver of worn silver dog tags flashed, not hers, but old, weathered. No one asked about them, not yet, but a few caught it. A Vietnam veteran in the back straightened in his seat. The murmurs grew softer. The SEAL captain's gaze sharpened. He had seen enough soldiers to know when a story ran deeper than what was spoken. He let the silence breathe, watching her carefully. "Afghanistan," he said again, almost to himself. "What unit?" Her reply was steady. "E Company, 2nd Battalion, 25th Aviation Regiment, sir." The veterans in the back nodded almost instinctively. That wasn't a guess. That wasn't something you'd pluck from a movie script. That was lived experience. But the crowd wasn't ready to yield. "Not yet. Maybe she was supply," someone said, voice louder than it needed to be. "Flying crates doesn't make you a combat pilot." Emily didn't respond. Her silence was its own weapon. It unsettled them. Then came the scar. It wasn't obvious at first. The angle of the lights in the hall concealed it. But when she turned slightly, her profile caught the glow. A thin, pale line running just beneath her hairline and down along her temple. Not deep, but unmistakable once you saw it. A scar like that didn't come from bumping your head on a helicopter doorframe. It was the kind born in chaos, in fire, in survival. A young corporal noticed first. He squinted, then whispered to his neighbor. "You see that? Above her temple?" The neighbor shrugged, trying to look indifferent, but his eyes lingered longer than before. The whispers spread differently this time, not with laughter, with uncertainty. And still, Emily said nothing. What would you have thought, sitting in that hall? Would you still doubt her? Or would you start to wonder? The SEAL captain's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, studying her scar. Then he asked the question no one else had yet dared. "Call sign?" The air shifted again. Call signs weren't given lightly. They weren't self-chosen nicknames. They were earned in sweat, in fire, in the unforgiving fraternity of combat. Emily's answer was quiet, but clear enough to cut through the room. "Valkyrie, sir." The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier. Several heads turned sharply. A murmur rose from the back. Someone's eyes widened, recognition flickering. "Wait," a Ranger veteran whispered to the man beside him. "Did she just say Valkyrie?" The man frowned. "I've heard that before." Another voice chimed in, low and almost reverent. "Korengal Valley. The night extraction. I remember the report." But most of the hall didn't understand. To them, it was just a word. A strange, almost mythical title. Still, the tone of those who did know was unmistakable. And for the first time, the laughter had truly stopped. But the disbelief wasn't gone. It hung on, desperate, clinging like a shadow. A Marine in the middle rows raised his voice, trying to break the tension. "Valkyrie? Sounds like something out of a comic book. No way that's real." Yet his words rang hollow. Even he seemed to doubt them as he said them, because the room was shifting, undeniably. And then came the photo. Pinned on the far wall of the hall, part of a collage of framed images from past deployments, was a grainy picture. Most hadn't noticed it. Soldiers in a dust-choked valley, helmets tilted back, gathered around a helicopter on a rocky ledge. The helicopter bore scars of its own, patched holes, burned paint, and standing near its cockpit door, helmet tucked under one arm, was a slender figure. Not everyone saw it, but a few eyes locked onto the photo, then flicked back to Emily. The resemblance was undeniable. One older sergeant major, seated near the side, froze when he made the connection. His lips parted, but no sound came. He had been there. Not on that ledge, but in the aftermath. He remembered hearing the story of the pilot who had landed under fire to pull men out. His eyes softened. He didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He just watched her with something new, respect. And little by little, others noticed the shift. The tattoo. The scar, the dog tags, the call sign, the photo on the wall. Each piece on its own might mean nothing. Together, they painted a picture no one could ignore. But Emily never boasted, never explained. She let the silence work for her, and it did. Because now, instead of mocking, the room was whispering. Instead of laughter, there were questions. Was she really Valkyrie? Could this quiet, unassuming captain truly be the one whose name had echoed across valleys years ago? The SEAL captain's eyes narrowed. He had heard the name before. He had read the after-action reports. He remembered the whispers of soldiers alive because a pilot refused to turn away. But he wasn't ready to reveal it yet. Not here. Not now. Instead, he leaned back, letting the tension coil tighter. "Interesting," he murmured. The rest of the hall waited, restless, uneasy. And Captain Emily Carter stood just as she always had, steady, calm, unflinching, while the clues of her past circled the room like unseen ghosts, waiting for someone to finally connect them. The SEAL captain let the room breathe a few seconds longer, then nodded toward the stage where a folding table stood beside a sand table and a projector. "All right," he said, voice even. "We're going to run a quick scenario. Nothing classified. Just a problem set. Anyone who says they're a combat pilot should be able to help." Chairs creaked. People leaned forward. He motioned to a staff sergeant near the aisle. "You. Grab the kit." The sergeant hauled a battered green Pelican case onto the table. He flicked the latches and pulled out a mix of gear that looked thrown together from a dozen deployments. A grease pencil-scarred map of a mountain valley, a protractor, grease pencils, a red-lensed flashlight, a flight kneeboard with a blank card, a handheld radio, and, almost comically, the top cover and feed tray from an M24E. Snickers flickered around the hall. "Door gunner starter pack," someone muttered. "Let's see if she even knows what that is," another added. The captain tapped the sand table. It was a plywood box filled with tan grit and a few foam ridgelines. Someone had stuck toothpicks and colored yarn into it to mark a river, a village, and a jagged ridgeline. A laminated card labeled the terrain, KHURMA, Valley Training. He glanced at Emily. "Captain Carter, since you're standing, you can choose your lane, weapons, comms, or flight planning." Emily didn't answer immediately. She set her shoulders and stepped down the aisle, boots quiet on the floor. When she reached the table, she put a palm lightly on the edge, as if feeling for vibrations. Her face didn't change, only her eyes sharpened. "Flight," she said, "but I'll touch the other two if needed." Groans from a few rows. "Of course," someone said. "Pick the easy one." "Theory," another chimed in. "Let's hear her talk wind like a weather lady." Emily ignored them. She slid the map onto the sand table, aligning ridgelines with the foam. With her thumb, she smoothed the grit into a narrow saddle on the east ridge. Her movements were unhurried, precise. The SEAL captain folded his arms. "Problem set is simple. Rangers pinned at grid 1234, 1234 valley floor, west of the river bend. Troops in contact. Casualties unknown. You've got 2 Blackhawks, 40% fuel. Dusk, 20 minutes until last light. Mountains to 8,000 feet. 30-knot winds out of the west, gusting. You've got a JTAC on the ground and 1 A-10 overhead for show of force. Your call." Emily nodded once. She picked up a grease pencil. Two-ship utility, valley extraction, dusk, gusting crosswind, possible brownout, power limited. She drew a quick circle on the map, then a cone through the valley. Ingress here, she said, tapping the east saddle. Wind at our tail on approach, but it puts rotors away from the ridge lift. We'll ride the shadow. We'll take it dark. NVG's on. IR strobes for Chalk 2 only. A-10 holds east, 1,000 feet above the valley. Eyes on the saddle, show of force on my call. A murmur rippled across the front rows. Not laughter this time, but the soft sound of heads turning. She turned to the staff sergeant. Hand held on? He thumbed it alive. The radio crackled. It wasn't connected to anything beyond a local repeater, a simple training loop, but the hiss was familiar to every person in the room. Emily lifted it, keyed without looking. Ground element, this is Chalk 1, 2 ship inbound from the east saddle. 1 minute call on your smoke. Her voice changed. A switch flipped. Calm, clipped, radio ready. A few in the back looked up sharply at the fragment that slipped. Volk. Before she corrected herself to Chalk 1, the SEAL captain caught it. His brow twitched, but he said nothing. Hold, a voice said over the trainer net. A sergeant backstage, playing JTAC. LZ is contested. Taking sporadic fire from the north tree line. We've got 3 urgent, 2 priority. Dusty, say approach. Emily was already scribbling on the kneeboard, neat block letters. Approach from the east. Chalk 2 offset left, high cover, then drop into trail as we commit. Lights out. Rotor wash will be an issue. We'll use step down to keep dust off the LZ. Trend landing to the south side of the clearing. Stay off the painted rock. It'll reflect our IR like a beacon. Egress south along the river. Then climb hard east back to the saddle. Wave off on lost visual, single engine, or unbrief movement in the LZ. Copy, the trainer JTAC said, tone a little different now. Advise Medevac 9 line. Emily didn't reach for a card. She didn't need to. Her voice carried it from memory. Line 1. Grid 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. 2. Call sign, hammer. 2 1. 3. 2 urgent litter, 1 urgent surgical, 2 priority litter. 4. No special equipment. 5. Security hot, taking sporadic. 6. Marking by IR strobe and cold smoke, color on request. 7. 2 US, 3 ANA. 8. Wounds, 1 GSW chest, 1 amputation below knee, 1 penetrating trauma abdomen, 2 concussions. 9. Terrain flat with obstacles, north tree line, winds 30 from the west, gusting. The radio hissed, then fell silent. So did the hall. She had not missed a single line. She had not stumbled. In the third row, the Marine lieutenant who joked about coffee runs stared at her kneeboard, then at her hands. His smirk was gone. Emily circled 2 points on the map. Chalk 2, you are my eyes until I commit. If the dust goes 0-0, you call me out of it. Crew chief on the right, you own right sector, call posts and wires. Left side, you own the tree line. I don't want to hear about it after the fact. We brief it now, we live or die by it. Someone cleared his throat. It sounded like an apology that didn't know its shape yet. She looked at the SEAL captain. We need a strip light if you want us to see anything in that brownout. I'll go no landing if it's a soup. He nodded slowly. How do you mitigate? Oblique approach, she answered. Hover taxi the final 20 meters, nose pointed into the wind just off the chalks. Keep the tail clear of the trees. If it's talcum, we'll kick up a wall. So we stage a pickup point 5 meters south of the initial. If I lose my reference, I'm out. I won't plant the nose in a ditch to prove a point. From the aisle, the burly sergeant who joked about tour guides crossed his arms again, not to challenge, but to anchor himself. He was listening. The captain gestured to the M240 parts on the table. Crew chief calls gun issue, he said. Feed tray jams on the go. What then? Emily didn't hesitate. She reached for the top cover and feed tray with one hand and the training bolt with the other. moving like someone who'd been handed problems under worse skies. She flipped the imaginary top cover, cleared the non-existent belt, wrapped the feed tray with the back of her knuckles where dents like to hide, and, without looking, pointed to the tiny burr that wasn't actually there. "You're going to get a stoppage right here," she said, tapping the spot with a grease pencil. "Crew chief works it twice and thinks it's the feed pawl. It's not. It's this burr. He needs a multi-tool, scrape, check the spring tension, reseat. If he can't do it in 15 seconds, he safes and calls cold gun." I don't want to run away on lift. The room was very quiet. A door gunner in the back, retired, exhaled the word, "Yeah," like a confession. Emily set the parts down gently, fingertips resting on the cold metal as if reassuring an old friend. Then she stepped back to the sand table. "If the LZ is truly hot," she continued, "JTAC throws the hog in low for a show. We time our run with his pass to ride the heads-down moment. And," she paused, scanning the map again, "we brief the ground force to cut all white light and muzzle flash. If I see unbriefed white light in the dust, I'm going to assume fratricide risk and wave. They need to hear that now, not while we're chewing talc." Someone in the 6th row, older, murmured, "She's done this." Emily turned the map 90 degrees. "Density altitude," she said softly. "We're at 8,000 feet, dusk, 30-knot winds, 35 Celsius in the day, figure 25 at last light. Power margins thin, we go in light. We dump external stores. We'll run with minimum fuel, 40% to bingo, and stage a forward refuel at the eastern saddle if we have to cycle twice." No dead weight. A chuckle rose, not mocking, but surprised. "She's calculating power margin on the fly," someone whispered. The SEAL captain let the moment stretch, then asked, "Ground force has an ANA squad attached, interpreter is down. How do you deconflict in the chaos?" Emily's gaze flicked up, and for the first time her expression shifted, a small, private memory crossing her eyes. When she spoke, her voice came gentle, carrying the soft rhythm of another language. "Brothers, stand out of the dust. Turn off every white light." "It's okay. I'm coming." The Afghan veteran near the back straightened hard in his seat. The words were clean, Pashto, simple and direct. "Brothers, stand out of the dust. Turn off every white light." "It's okay. I'm coming." The veteran swallowed, eyes glassing for a heartbeat. He whispered, "She said it right. She said it like she said it before." Emily nodded once, acknowledging the Afghan veteran without looking directly at him. "If we lose the interpreter," she added in English, "I'll talk them onto our bird." Simple commands. Hands open, head down. No grabbing the skids. I'll show them with my hands before the rotors are in my hair. The Marine lieutenant who'd joked about coffee runs earlier folded his arms for a different reason now. Not arrogance, but restraint, as if he needed to keep his hands still. He stared at the map as though it might stare back. Emily set the grease pencil down. "Contingencies," she said. "Single engine failure on short final. We pedal forward, nose low, fly out of the dust, and put her down at the river bend. I'd rather plant in clear air than turn catastrophic in the cloud. If ground loses the IR strobe, I want a cold smoke on my mark, but only on my mark. If they pop too early, we wait for it to lift, or we go around. We do not want blind into a wall." The captain's lips pressed thin. "And if a man goes down at the skids?" Emily's jaw tightened just a fraction. "Then I hold the hover," she said. "Crew chief does his job. If he can't lift him, he hooks the ruck strap under the arms and drags. If I see the tail sliding, I'm out. No heroics with 20 rotors inches from trees and rock. We live to come back around." The retired door gunner in the back nodded slowly, eyes wet. He'd seen tails slide. He'd heard the crunch. The captain walked closer. He was close enough now to see the thin scar at her temple. He didn't point it out. He didn't need to. He only stood beside the sand table, the two of them above the foam ridges like ghosts of a dozen valleys they'd never spoken about. "All right," he said quietly. "Run it." Emily did. She gave the room the call and response of a flight that only half of them had ever ridden in and the other half had prayed for. She keyed the trainer radio, voice steady, and counted down the legs like stepping stones across a river at flood. 1 minute out. Smoke is green. Copy. Green for me. Cold to all else. I have the strobe. 30 seconds. Dust wall forming. Chalk 2. You are high cover until I call commit. Watch that tree line. I want your eyes on the northern branch. Committing. Hover taxi. Crew chiefs, call my drift. Left 3. Back 1. Hold. Set. Skids light. Load now. Load now. Her hands moved as if the cyclic and collective were in them again, micro gestures in the air, muscle memory puppeting silence. People in the hall found themselves leaning with her, a whole room ghost, hovering above a plywood LZ. Wave off. Wait, no, hold. I have visual. Chalk 2, shift. Right 2. We're clear. Load complete. Coming up. Nose, south. Egress river. Up through the shadow. The trainer JTAC backstage forgot his script and just breathed. Copy. Emily set the radio down, then wrote 3 numbers on the flight card and slid it to the SEAL captain. Fuel remaining, time en route, alternate HLZ. She'd kept it all in her head. Again, she said softly, surprising even herself. We do it again if we have to. We cycle until we've got them. A long breath moved through the hall. No one laughed. No one had the shape for it anymore. One of the older veterans stood partway and then sat again, as if unsure if standing was allowed yet. He rubbed his hands together. She's good, he whispered. Emily reached for the M240 parts again, almost absent-mindedly, and finished the reassembly she had begun earlier. The top cover snapped shut with a firm, clean click that seemed too loud for a weapon that wasn't actually there. She set it aside and wiped the grease pencil smudge from her knuckle with her thumb. Then she did something small, so small it almost didn't register, but it slid under the room's skin like a splinter of revelation. She stepped to the collage of photos on the wall, to the grainy picture of a helicopter on a rocky ledge. Her fingers hovered a second over the glass. She didn't touch it. She only traced, in the air, the outline of the ledge, the dangerous slant, the stupid, necessary risk, and then the faint shape of the pilot standing by the cockpit door, helmet under one arm. She didn't say it was her. She didn't need to. Someone in the back said to no one and everyone, no one hovers that clean in that dust without living through it. Emily came back to the table. On the edge of the sand, she placed the smallest thing she had, one of her father's old dog tags. The chain never left her neck. She only slid the metal free and let it rest against the grit for a breath, then lifted it back again. It made a soft sound, metal whispering of years and roads and a promise made on a quiet porch in El Paso. The Afghan veteran wiped his eyes, unashamed. The Marine lieutenant stared at his boots. The burly sergeant shifted his weight, jaw working like a man chewing humility. Emily looked at the SEAL captain. Sir, she said, voice steady again, with your permission, I'd like to brief the ground team properly. They shouldn't have to learn this in a room like this. They should hear it now, for when it's not training. The captain studied her. For a heartbeat, an expression crossed his face that could have been memory, or guilt, or recognition trying to find its form. He nodded once. Proceed. Emily turned to the room. Her posture didn't change, but her voice did, softer and somehow stronger. If you ever ride my bird, she said, you need to know 3 things. 1, I will wave off before I kill you with a bad landing. That is not cowardice. That is discipline. 2, if I say heads down, you put your faces in the dirt, and trust me, I will not lie to you over the rotor noise. 3, if you are carrying a brother who is bleeding, you do not apologize for the blood. You put him on my floor, and you let your hands tremble later. No one moved. For my crew, she added, glancing at the imaginary men at her side, you know your sectors. You call the wires. You call the posts. You call my drift like my life depends on it. Because it does, and so does everyone on board. You don't wait for me to be scared. You give me the facts before I am. She let silence settle again, then said, almost like a promise, and if we don't get you the first time, we circle and we come again. We do not leave you just because it is hard. A whisper moved through the hall like a long, low wind. No one laughed. No one sneered. What would you have done then, sitting there? Would you still doubt her? Or would you feel the weight of a truth you couldn't name yet, pressing into your chest like rotor wash? The SEAL captain took a slow breath. He reached for the flight card she'd filled and turned it over. On the back, she had sketched the valley in 20 clean lines. Ingress, egress, saddle, tree line, river. A map that looked less like a drawing and more like muscle memory spilled onto paper. He looked up. Their eyes met. Thank you, Captain, he said. It was not the reveal. It was not the salute. Not yet, but it wasn't nothing. It was the first seam splitting in a wall. Emily nodded once. She slid the kneeboard back across the table, gathered the scattered gear into neat piles, and set the M240 back into the case as if laying a friend to rest. On her way back to the third row, she paused at the end of the aisle. The Afghan veteran stood as she passed. Their eyes met. He lifted his hand, palm open, not quite a salute and not quite a wave. She returned the gesture. The small, simple sign of people who have heard the same storm. Then she sat, hands folded, steady as ever. The room was no longer the room it had been. Not because she'd shouted, not because she'd told a legend, but because she had done something small and irrefutable. She had taken a pile of gear in a toy valley and turned them into a door that opened on the real thing. The dust, the math, the fear, the rules that keep men alive. A dozen people in that hall now carried a thought they couldn't shake. If what she just did in a classroom felt like that, what would it feel like under fire? The answer wasn't spoken. It hung there, just out of reach, heavy, waiting. As the captain set the flight card down, as the whispers died, as the next breath the room took was not laughter but something closer to respect. The reveal would come. But not yet. Not before they sat with the small shock of competence that had just rewired the air. And in that pause, in that new quiet, the call sign some had only half heard began to curl through the back rows like a rumor returning home. Valkyrie. The SEAL captain didn't speak right away. He stood with the flight card in his hand, eyes on Emily, as if the paper itself had whispered a name he hadn't let himself say out loud. The hall settled into a strange, expectant quiet. The kind of quiet that comes just before truth walks in and pulls up a chair. A door opened at the back. Two late arrivals slipped inside, slow and careful, like men entering a church after the hymn had started. One wore an old ranger scroll on his sleeve, edges frayed, hair gone steel gray at the temples. The other's posture carried a lifetime of command without needing insignia to prove it. A Navy Master Chief with the kind of face that had seen 1,000 briefings and twice as many nights without sleep. They paused, taking in the room. The Master Chief glanced at the sand table, the map, the M240 parts, the woman standing near the edge of the stage with her hands quietly folded. The Ranger's gaze went straight past everything else and stopped on the photo wall. He stood there, breathing through his nose, the way men do when old air returns and fills their lungs with years they thought they'd set down. "Sir," someone whispered to the captain, "that's Master Chief Riordan." The name moved through the rows like a current. A few backs straightened, a few chins lifted. You didn't have to like the Navy to know the weight of a man who'd pulled people home more times than he could count. Riordan didn't introduce himself. He just looked at Emily for a long moment, then at the scar by her temple, then at the dog tag chain bright against the muted fabric of her uniform. The Ranger finally spoke, voice low. Is that her?" No one answered. No one had to. The SEAL captain turned the flight card over again, as if the map she'd sketched might rearrange into a signature. When he looked up, the testing edge was gone from his eyes. "Captain," he said quietly, "what night did you get that scar?" Emily didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Korengal. Night extraction. Late October. The ranger's jaw worked once, like a man bracing for a wave. He stepped closer to the photo wall and took in the grainy ledge, the crooked landing skids, the dust frozen mid-surge like a living thing. "The ledge," he whispered. "Lima Zulu Charlie. We called it the anvil." Riordan moved toward the stage, boots steady against the floor. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at Emily. "Call sign?" he asked, though he already knew. Emily's eyes didn't waver. "Valkyrie." A breath pulled through the hall, not a gasp. Not drama. The sound of recognition finding purchase. Riordan nodded once, like a page had finally been found in a book he'd been searching for. He turned to the captain and spoke not in performance, but in memory. "We had a chalk stuck that night," he said. "Rangers and ANA. Bad ground. No moon. Wind cutting the valley sideways. Everyone figured it was going to be a body recovery by morning." He looked back at Emily. She came over the ridge, dark. No lights. Not a sound, but the rotor and a voice on the net that never broke cadence. His eyes softened, just a fraction. And when the valley turned to talc and the world went white, she did not lose the hover. The ranger finally tore himself from the photo and faced the room. His voice had that gravel you only get from shouting through rotor wash and smoke. "I wasn't on that ledge," he said, "but my platoon was the one she came back for on the second cycle. The bird that brought my men out had a pilot with a steady hand and a scar like the one she's wearing. They said her crew chief counted the wires by touch and she still kept the tail clear." A young Marine in the second row swallowed. He hadn't apologized for the coffee run joke yet. He didn't know how to. The SEAL captain set the card down and stepped toward Emily. "Wait," he said, not to stall but because disbelief and awe were trying to share the same breath. "Are you Captain Carter, the one who flew the night raid?" Emily met his eyes. She did not smile.
"Yes, sir."
Silence fell in a clean sheet. Even the HVAC hum seemed to take a knee. Someone near the back whispered, "Valkyrie," like a prayer. Someone else had taught him and he just remembered the words. Riordan let the crowd sit in it. He let them feel the weight of quiet competence, the difference between stories told and lives lived. Then he added the detail no one there knew they were waiting for. After-action report listed the pilot as Captain E. "Carter," he said, no flourish. No brag. Just a note about superior airmanship under degraded visual environments and refusal to abandon friendly forces despite fuel and dust hazards. He turned to the hall. "That's the long way of saying some men are alive because she wouldn't quit on a night the valley tried to eat the light." The ranger had both hands on the back of a chair now, knuckles white. He blinked hard and then didn't bother hiding it when his eyes shined. "My radio up," he said. He wasn't 21 yet. Took a round through the pack. They said a pilot's voice kept him awake, kept telling him, "Stay with me, I'm not done with you." He made it. He's got 2 kids now. Emily didn't move, but something in her breathing changed. The smallest ripple under the ribcage. The Marine lieutenant who'd laughed earlier stood without meaning to. The motion startled him. He looked down, then up, then cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said. It was all he had. It was enough. The SEAL captain seemed to be measuring his own memory against the woman in front of him. "I read that AAR," he said. "I remember the last line. Recommend recognition commensurate with risk assumed." There was no award recommendation attached. Emily's jaw flexed once. Not anger, not bitterness. Just the muscle moving where words didn't need to. "It was a team night," she said. "Crew chief earned his stripes twice. Medics did the miracle work. JTAC kept the tree line honest. I got us there and got us out." "That's the job." Riordan stared a second longer, then did something small that landed loud. He took one step back and squared his shoulders the way sailors do on a deck when it's time to give the sea its due. "Captain Carter," he said, voice even but carrying, "on the night they told us to hold and hope, you didn't. You flew." No one applauded. Not yet. The hall wasn't at clapping. It was at understanding. An older Vietnam vet, the one who'd spotted the worn dog tags, lifted a single finger and traced a tiny circle in the air, the shape of a rotor seen from below. He nodded once, more to himself than anyone else. The ranger pointed at the photo again, then at Emily, making the connection for those who needed the line drawn all the way. "That's her," he said. "That's the pilot who turned a ledge that shouldn't have been a landing zone into the last good decision of a bad night." Someone whispered, "My God, but it wasn't blasphemy." It was relief arriving 20 minutes late and still welcome. The SEAL captain collected himself. He turned to the rows that had laughed, to the pockets that had doubted, and he didn't scold them. He didn't have to. He simply spoke the truth aloud so that it could do its work. "You were looking at a stereotype," he said. "I was too." Then she ran a valley on a table and made my stomach remember things I was trying to forget. He faced Emily again. "Captain Carter, Valkyrie, I recognize you." The words were not an award. They were a light switched on. Emily inclined her head. "Thank you, sir." A beat passed. Then another. In that narrow, fragile quiet, small confirmations rose up like markers along a dark trail. The retired door gunner lifted his hand and rubbed the notch on the M240's feed tray cover exactly where she'd pointed. He nodded to himself. A private absolution. The Afghan veteran murmured a line of Pashto, nothing dramatic, just, "We saw you." And when Emily's eyes met his, she answered with, "I saw you too." The Marine lieutenant sat down slowly, palms flat on his knees, back straight. He looked like a man deciding something about the way he would speak in rooms for the rest of his life. The SEAL captain stepped aside so the Master Chief and the Ranger could come closer. They didn't crowd her. They just stood in the space where a corridor of respect had formed. Riordan spoke for both of them. "We've lost good people in rooms like this," he said. "To ego, to noise, to the need to sound like the bravest voice in the row. You didn't outshout anyone. You just told the truth like a pilot does, with hands and math and a map." He glanced to the side toward the photo wall again. "And when the dust came, you did not blink." Emily breathed out, slow. "I did," she said softly. "A private correction." I blinked. But the crew chief didn't, and the medic didn't, and the ranger who grabbed his buddy's strap didn't. I did the part with the pedals. They did the part that hurts more. The ranger let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "That's her," he said, shaking his head. "I've never even met her, and that's her." The captain looked at the front row where a handful of young recruits sat rigid with the effort of not moving. He addressed them without turning away from Emily. "Memorize this," he said. "Courage isn't volume. It's not the story you rehearse for after. It's a set of decisions no one sees, stacked one on another in the worst minutes of a long night." He looked back to Emily. The question in his eyes had finally settled. The testing was over. "Captain Carter," he said, "welcome." It was a simple word. But it closed a circle. Emily's reply was as gentle as everything else she'd offered. "Glad to be here, sir." The moment held like a hover balance, breath, blades beating an invisible rhythm in the room. Across the hall, the doubts that had strutted in with jokes and smirks stood unarmed. They had no weapons left. The clues had been counted. The story had stepped out of the grainy photo and into the light, and the authority who needed to say it had said it. She was the one. The pilot on the ledge. The voice on the radio that would not leave men behind. The crowd didn't rise yet. The salute hadn't come. That was for the next breath, the next beat. For now, the hall did the only right thing it could do. It went quiet enough to hear the past land. The silence that followed the captain's recognition of her name stretched long enough for every man and woman in the room to feel its weight. And then, finally, the ranger lifted his hand to his brow. Slowly, deliberately. The kind of salute that wasn't just regulation but reverence. His palm trembled as it rested against his temple. For a moment, it was just him, one ranger saluting one pilot. Then the dam broke. Across the hall, others stood. SEALs, Marines, soldiers, airmen, even the young recruits who had smirked minutes earlier. One by one, they rose from their chairs, boots echoing on the wooden floor. Salutes snapped into place. The air filled with the sharp, rhythmic sound of palms striking brows. The Marine lieutenant who had mocked her coffee runs stood last. His face was pale, his jaw tight. But when he raised his hand, it wasn't half-hearted. It was crisp, perfect. A salute born of shame turned into respect. Emily's eyes flicked over the sea of faces. Some wet with tears, some rigid with pride, some simply stunned. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She returned their salute with the quiet precision of a soldier who had learned long ago that humility was stronger than pride. The SEAL captain himself held his hand longest. His voice carried through the hall. Captain Carter, combat pilot. Valkyrie, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. The applause didn't come right away. For several seconds, it was only the sound of hands raised in silence, but when it did arrive, it was thunder. A wave of clapping, boots stamping, voices rising not in mockery but in honor. The Afghan veteran in the back stood with tears on his cheeks. In his own tongue he called out, "Da Valkyrie, da Swane, Asmana Malika, the Valkyrie." The angel of the brave sky. The hall erupted again, louder. The words spread through the room, bouncing off walls like a hymn. Valkyrie. Valkyrie. Somewhere in the back, a recruit whispered, "That's what courage looks like." Emily lowered her hand slowly, the salute complete. She stood there, chest rising with controlled breath, eyes misting but unbroken. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe what others already knew. Her quiet duty had become something more. A symbol. A legacy. The room had turned. Where there had been doubt, there was now awe. Where there had been laughter, there was now reverence. And where there had been silence, there was now the loudest respect of all. The climax wasn't in the noise, though. It was in the shift. In the realization that one small woman with steady hands had silenced an entire hall with nothing but truth and humility. The applause lingered, rolling through the auditorium like thunder over distant hills. It wasn't the kind of applause that begged for more or demanded a bow. It was reverent, almost reluctant to fade, as if no one wanted to be the first to let go of the sound. Captain Emily Carter didn't step forward to bask in it. She didn't smile or wave. She simply lowered her salute, eased her hands back to her sides, and waited until the clapping began to quiet on its own. When the last echo of boots against the floor gave way to stillness, she spoke, her voice carried with the same steady calm that had defined her from the moment she stood. "I'm grateful for the respect you've shown today," she said, "but I don't stand here because of what I did. I stand here because of what my crew did, because of the medics who never let go, because of the soldiers who fought to carry their wounded to the bird. I did my part, yes. But none of us survive alone, not one." Her words settled over the room like a blanket. Men and women who had lived their own battles, who had lost friends and carried scars, knew she spoke the truth. Emily took a slow breath, her eyes flicking briefly toward the photo wall, then back to the sea of faces. "You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room," she continued. "You don't have to boast or prove yourself with stories. Strength doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it looks like quiet consistency. Sometimes it looks like someone who just refuses to quit, even when no one's watching." Her gaze passed over the young recruits in the front row, the same ones who had laughed earlier. "And sometimes it looks like humility. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing your duty anyway. It's about trusting the people beside you and letting them trust you in return. That's what carried me through those nights." The Afghan veteran nodded slowly, his lips moving with silent agreement. The Ranger clenched his jaw, remembering his men who had lived because of her flight. The Marine lieutenant looked down at his boots, shame replaced now by reflection. Emily's voice softened, though it never wavered. "When you walk out of this hall, you'll carry different things. Some of you carry memories that keep you awake at night. Some of you carry pride that no one can take away. and some of you carry doubts about whether you're enough. But remember this, valor doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always come with medals or headlines. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's small. Sometimes it's the decision to do your job well, even if no one ever knows your name. She paused, the silence deliberate, letting the truth settle. If you're ever tempted to mock someone because they don't look the part, or because their strength isn't loud, remember this day. Remember that appearances don't carry soldiers out of valleys. Actions do. The hall was silent again. Not the sharp silence of doubt from earlier, but the full silence of respect. Emily gave a small nod toward the SEAL captain. "That's all I have, sir." She sat down. No dramatic exit, no lingering in the spotlight. Just as she had lived her service, she left the moment humbly, content to let the weight of it rest with those who needed it most. The SEAL captain looked out over the hall. His voice carried the final chord. You've heard it for yourselves. Courage can be quiet. Heroism can wear an ordinary face. And sometimes, the one you least expect to rise is the one who carries you all home. Heads nodded throughout the room. Some eyes shone. Some lips pressed together with thoughts unspoken. The moral of the day didn't need to be written on a banner or spoken in a speech. It lived in the silence, in the humility of a pilot who refused to boast, in the shift of hearts that had learned something about judgment and respect. Courage, they realized, doesn't demand recognition. True strength often doesn't need to be explained. It simply endures. And as the hall slowly emptied, one truth lingered, whispered in the minds of every man and woman who had witnessed it: heroes dawn. And so, the room that once rattled with doubt now stood in reverent silence. Captain Emily Carter never asked for recognition, yet she earned it in the only way that matters, through duty, sacrifice, and the unyielding will to bring others home. If this story moved you, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these powerful tales of courage and honor. In the comments below, salute Captain Carter by leaving just one word. The word that, for you, defines true strength. Because sometimes, the strongest voices aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones, the ones who simply rise, unshaken, and remind us all what courage really looks like.